Thank you all for joining us. We're going to take a quick moment to ensure everyone in the audience is ready and comfortable with the technical aspects of today's presentation. As you will see, closed captioning is enabled for today's workshop. We also have American Sign Language capabilities enabled. You can activate that by clicking the interpretation icon on your Zoom navigation bar. If you need tech support during today's presentation at any time, please send a chat message to the hosts and we will address it for you as soon as we're able. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please utilize our Q&A feature. The questions will be sent directly to the presenters and the moderators, and we will do our best to address as many as possible in the time that we have during our Q&A session. Next slide. I'd also like to note that the views expressed in written conference materials or publications and by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsements by the U.S. government. Next slide. Today's workshop is hosted by SAMHSA's 988 Crisis Systems Response TTAC. SAMHSA has selected Altarum to provide training and technical assistance supports to states, territories, tribal organizations, and community partners across the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline and Crisis Continuum of Care, along with our partners W2 Consulting Corporation and Change Matrix LLC, who have extensive experience with crisis services and technical assistance. The CSR-TTAC was formed to support the continued growth of the 988 Lifeline and build a more robust crisis care system. The goal of the Crisis Response TTAC is to support a crisis care system that is integrated, sustainable, and aligned with evidence-based and evidence-informed practices. We'll also be dropping a link for TA services in the chat. I'd also like to acknowledge our SAMHSA partners. Ms. Jill Mays, the Division Director of Crisis System Transformation for 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. Next slide. And also Captain Corey Palmer, who is the workforce lead at the Crisis System Transformation for the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. Next slide. I'd also like to acknowledge our workforce wellness team, Lydia Hernay, Jennifer Sedevy, Megan McGregor, and myself. I'm Stephanie Bearscounts. Next slide. Today, after I introduce our speakers, they will be going over our learning objectives and providing their presentation. Following that, we will have a Q&A session and then we'll wrap things up. Next slide. Today's workshop features two leaders from the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center who bring deep experience in crisis care, program leadership, and person-centered practice. As an assistant program director, Courtney Castaneda Cruz oversees clinical operations for the 988 Lifeline, including follow-up, familiar contacts, and mandated reporter programs. With 8 years at the Suicide Prevention Center, Courtney brings a strong commitment to person-centered care. Next slide, please. Alejandra Vargas is also an assistant program director who oversees the Spanish bilingual clinical team supporting the 988 Lifeline, including Spanish voice and chat and text services. Alejandra's experience spans suicide hotlines, nonprofit management, psychiatric urgent care, and work with immigrant communities with a strong focus in community empowerment. And now I'm going to turn it over to today's speakers. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for welcoming us here into this space. I want to thank all of you for being here, both live today and anybody who is watching this as a recording later on. As mentioned, I'm Alejandra Vargas, and I'm with the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, and I'm here with Courtney Castañeda Cruz, who will be supporting as well and providing this information. Our topic today is titled Boundary Setting in the Workplace. Next slide, please. All right, so our agenda today is we'll be going through learning objectives, talking a bit more about ourselves and the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center. We'll be discussing professional boundaries in highly professional work, identity, community and boundaries, connection and nurturing professionalism, and how to encourage healthy boundaries at work. And this is a moment to also pause and provide a reminder that all views and opinions discussed herein represent our own work and/or the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center and are not meant to represent SAMHSA, the Department of Health and Human Services, or the National Administration of 988. Next slide, please. Okay, our learning objectives, you'll see these throughout the slides today, and they are primarily four. We're going to define professional boundaries within crisis work and explain their role in supporting emotional well-being, ethical practice, and long-term workforce sustainability. We'll recognize early warning signs that professional boundaries are eroding or not being maintained in crisis response roles. We'll identify common challenges to establishing and maintaining professional boundaries in crisis response settings and apply practical strategies to address these challenges. Finally, we'll identify strategies for developing organizational policies and leadership practices that model professional boundaries and reinforce boundary setting as a shared organization norm. And we'll also be discussing and providing this through our own personal experience and experience within the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center. Next slide, please. Hey, you all got a short introduction to us a moment ago, and this slide wanted to show you a little bit more about our academic background individually as well, and to highlight that the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Service was founded in 1942 by the Hirsches here in Los Angeles, and really what truly runs through every service that we provide and every approach we have is what they believed in, which was support for the mind as well as the heart. Next slide. Okay, so professional boundaries in highly personal work, personal fulfillment, and personal growth. Next slide. When the professional is also personal, in the last many years, I think many of us will have noticed the increased importance and revaluing of lived life experience and personal connection to suicide prevention, to mental health services. It is oftentimes our lived experience and personal connections that brings us or even leads us into a professional environment to really provide person-centered care. It also means that many of us develop what we may call or refer to as a helper identity, where we may very deeply connect with what it means to help our community, to provide help for ourselves, for our loved ones, and considering what may bring us into this work or the experiences that keep us in very challenging work. Sometimes it may be challenging to differentiate when the person overlaps with their work, what part of our identities or how we think about ourselves are regarding our skill sets and our experiences and where that work environment overlaps. I want to discuss just a bit on clocking in and out and the importance of literally and figuratively clocking in and out of our roles. The literal would be when you clock in to share that you're either on the hotline or you are ready for clients. Maybe you are available or have an open door policy. It's so important that we show up entirely as ourselves in this role. And just as important is knowing when and how to clock out, to provide that space for ourselves, not as workers, not as helpers, but just as individual humans focusing on our wellness. This can be very challenging in a 24/7 work environment and in crisis work specifically, where how we feel and how our availability may very directly relate to the availability of services and the quality of care that we can provide. Personal connections in the workplace, again, are also areas that maintain us, that bring us into this work, that help us through those really challenging days, that help us celebrate when we achieve something that may seem impossible. We share sometimes heartache and, again, those celebratory moments with our peers. And we must also be aware of moments where we may need to preempt and respect boundaries in the workplace, where that personal connection, that personal celebration may filter into a space that is more professional or more personal rather than the professional. If you are a manager, you may have already had conversations where you get a sense that, okay, I think we're moving into personal self-disclosure a little bit beyond what we might want to be discussing. And you may have been called on redirecting conversation in a compassionate way, in a professional way, but still in a very personal way that holds the entire individual. So I'm curious, and I'd like to invite you all to participate by putting in the chat some examples of redirection that you've provided in the workplace. And this might be towards your peers, towards your reports, towards a community member. And again, this is within that space of this is highly personal work. It keeps us here, it brings us here, and it is also still work. So while we transition over into the next slide, please go ahead and add any comments that come to mind. And next slide. Okay, so I talked a little bit generally about personal meaning within this work, and it was general because it's oftentimes very personal, right? Personal lived life experience, talking about stories of survival, stories of achievements, our experiences. That is so much more common in the professional workspace. We can be professional and respected and be previous or even current clients of the mental health system as well. And we mustn't forget our role in highlighting the professional part of our work. And part of that is, sometimes we might hesitate providing or reinforcing work boundaries in these settings because we don't want to lose the individual. We don't want to become reflexive or miss the person for the work. So some ideas and successes that we have found is to really highlight the professional and academic interests of the individuals that we work with. We noted our academic background. How does our academic background relate directly to what brought us here? How does it reinforce the skill sets that we're learning in crisis work, whether that is 988 Lifeline? Maybe it set us up for uh, being more comfortable sitting in silence, asking informed questions, checking in on safety. For folks that are in person, maybe some of the experiences that you have personally and professionally allow you to show up in person more fully. And we really want to make sure that those are highlighted in our everyday work. What we bring into this space complements the training models that already exist in our professional workspaces. It's really important to discuss burnout and compassion fatigue and to name them when we see them and to lead by example. Discussing and calling burnout and compassion fatigue what it is an important way to maintain personal and professional connections at work. For managers and supervisors, for colleagues, noticing that there may be a place for support your peer is incredibly important. This is also a way to recognize, for example, let's say that I'm working with someone and suddenly they're not doing as well with leaving space for silence. This is an opportunity for me to to step in and bring attention to that. Maybe say something like, I noticed in X interaction, you came forward a bit differently, or, usually I see this as a place where you practice silence. I'm curious what's going on. Not as a punitive, but as I'm noticing a change in you professionally, and I wonder if that might be related to, and you leave that space for them. Could it be burnout? Could it be compassion fatigue? Sure, they could also be checking or trying a different approach to an intervention or an interaction, and exploring those changes could lead to really encouraging conversations. Highlighting professional accomplishments is so important. Did someone have a challenging interaction? Did they complete a training module that maybe was really challenging typically? Did they complete a degree, or did they get into a school? Are they looking into complementary skill sets? Being able to call those in, name that professional growth also creates that connection. It's not working in a professional space that recognizes you as a person isn't necessarily about knowing your personal life, but rather having a personal connection to your professional accomplishments and your personal areas for growth in future. So as managers, as colleagues, really important to check into what those goals might be, how they're getting there, and how we can provide one-on-one support where appropriate. Clarifying professional boundaries. This is something that I think I would like this first one. Blurred boundaries are not a sign of commitment. Just print it out and put up in front of my computer. Um, Signing in at any time of day, setting aside your own self-care, your own self-needs is not a sign of commitment. It is a sign of a blurred boundary. It is a sign that we need extra support. It might also signal that we love this work and maybe we're invigorated by it. That doesn't exclude the need for a compassionate boundary. And also the importance of seeing human resources and developing our relationships with human resources as a partner. We may not know, or we might be hesitant to find out the different resources that human resources can provide us in a professional workspace. It might be EAP. As a manager, it might be how to have challenging conversations or how to broach certain subjects that might be weighing on myself or on someone else. So, trusting human resources, knowing them by name, trusting them can also be a really strengthening part of the professional environment. And I see that some of you saw the ask for the chat. How do you nurture professional work environments? And if you're uncertain, how would you like to nurture professional work environments? Curious what that looks like for you all. And next slide.
As Alejandra mentioned, what a beautiful discourse that's happening in the chat, and wonderful for all of you to continue to learn from each other, because I'm learning from all of you as I'm reading the chat. So thank you for doing that. And as we touch on this, a person's identity influences how boundaries are experienced, but also how they're respected, they're challenged, but also how they're even supported. So many of you in the chat named that you come in with lived experience, and many staff, volunteers, managers join this work because of that lived experience. And because of that, we come in with especially empathetic and loving work and drive to do this. As a result, though, can be at a higher risk of boundary diffusion, which means taking interactions home in a very emotional way, can also mean identifying too closely with the help seeker, which can put a risk for what Ale mentioned of that blurred boundary showing up. But this is where, as an organization, can come in and bringing in that explicit supervision, that explicit support to ensure that individuals can maintain that longevity and can bring that very special experience to this work, to ensure that that lived experience is very unique to this work and can ensure that they are also getting the support that they need, that they can maintain that longevity here. Additionally, although we will not dive into it explicitly here, to mention it briefly, there are societal expectations put on certain individuals that can place some more emotional availability, which can put pressure on certain individuals more than others, which can blur boundaries or even cause certain individuals to overextend in their work, which can cause, again, that desire to want to show up more often, to want to be clocked in for longer, can want them to show up even more than maybe certain counterparts. This can often lead to some individuals coming in and feeling maybe misunderstood, maybe facing microaggressions, macroaggressions, and maybe further complicating that emotional labor and boundary management, such as even double duty. So when we're thinking even about at an organizational level and thinking about potentially volunteers and paid staff, because that's something that we have at D.D. Hirsch, sometimes volunteers may feel more guilty about limiting their availability because they feel, I'm a volunteer, how I should do more. I should be able to give more because I'm just a volunteer. And that word just can come in and feel like they're minimizing themselves and their identity within the organization. Whereas paid staff may feel that they can be more legitimate in asserting their time off because they do have a paid time off or protected time off, and limiting their ability to show up when they are protected to have that time off. Even thinking about different organization structure where there's peer support roles versus maybe a clinically defined role, where a peer support role is designed to have this ability for self-disclosure to build rapport, where that boundary can already become blurred. Whereas a clinical designed role where there is that idea to limit self-disclosure to build rapport, that built-in boundary is already there. So thinking about how an organization may respond already with how their structure is built in. Then thinking about intersectionality. So also boundaries for an individual is not shaped by a single identity factor, but rather at those intersections and where they may meet, where they may overlap, and how organizations can show up at these intersections and have flexible enough policies that can meet their staff and their workforce, but also support the organizational need and the help seekers that we serve. So as we're thinking about this, we also want to think about, when we think about boundaries in crisis work, we may picture very strict or clear lines, but we're actually going to transition and talk about a community that may not have such strict lines. So we're going to go into the next slide and actually talk about the rural community. So rural community actually has to have more of an intentional line. So just to take a bit of a step back, at D.D. Hirsch, we serve 5 service areas, which include Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Ventura County, and Riverside, which within those big 5 service areas, we actually have rural communities within them. But these communities do look different and have to be serviced differently than potentially an urban area. And to understand the rural experience, we have to think about how they are built up and how they may function differently than than an urban area. For example, most rural communities roughly are about 2,500 individuals compared to an urban center. So Los Angeles, for example, has 3.8 million individuals as a city, compared to, I currently reside in a rural town in Pennsylvania, which has 3,000 individuals. So based on that personal experience, I can state that the nearest grocery store is about an hour and a half away. There's only 2 Wi-Fi service providers. There is a large agricultural community out here where it's mostly farmland. Everyone here is mostly farmers, loggers, fishers, and they survive off of the land. And as a result, the community is very strong and they know everyone. Everyone knows every car that everyone drives. Everyone knows the children. There's many generations who live here, which is a very different community maybe than an urban center. So built in within this community is already maybe some of those blurred boundaries. So how we serve this community as 988 is different. There are some clinical considerations to come into and to serve this community. For example, when serving this community, thinking about it, it's what if I recognize this help seeker? What if there are no local resources to offer? What if they seek out more support because there are no local resources to offer? Or, for example, they may not even seek support because there is only one mental health provider in that community. And if they are to park there, everyone would recognize that car. So, thinking about these considerations and how to support them look different. But naming the limitation without abandoning the support is the strongest thing that we can do. And by supporting them by saying, I may not have all the resources, I may not have all the support, but we can think through some of those options together. Still setting that boundary, but also recognizing that we're sitting in that gap, we're understanding that, but we're also saying we are going to be as flexible as possible. Consistency is also a boundary here because individuals may reach out more often. We may see more frequent help seekers than not in these communities. As I mentioned, we do have these 5 service areas from D.D. Hirsch, and we do sometimes see more frequent from these rural areas that we do serve. So we have to avoid becoming the only support for these individuals and learning how we can support them to be and lean on maybe someone that they can find. And recognizing that the agricultural workforce within rural communities do have the highest suicide rate, and recognizing within this rural community how we can support them and be there for them in the way that they need and meeting the need there. And serving these rural communities often means sitting again in those gaps that we can't close, but staying present in those gaps without overextending will be quite often a theme you'll see throughout this presentation. So with that, we're going to highlight another community. So next slide.
Okay, thank you. At D.D. Hirsch, we have the absolute honor of being one of the centers that provide Spanish voice and Spanish chat and text services. And we receive contacts from all over the country and its territories. And something that is really important to note is that when providing support in a different language, it is not just about language acquisition. It is not just about being a speaker of the language itself. It carries with it different meaning. The way that we use language affects not just the help seeker, but ourselves as well as we utilize it. Understanding the experience of help seekers is really important to providing support. As Courtney mentioned, the community that someone comes from may affect the way that they receive services, the way that they're open to services, and the services that are available to them as well. We may need to know that for populations that primarily speak Spanish or would be more comfortable reaching out to a suicide and mental health hotline in Spanish, their circumstances and situations may vary greatly from those of someone that access 988 Lifeline or any other mental health service that isn't language specific. Their experience may have meant that this is the first time they're able to seek services in the language that they are most comfortable in, or that they're most comfortable and is available. Many Spanish speakers, that is their second language or third language, they may speak a different indigenous language that is not quite available yet. Importantly, we do provide language translation services as well so that we can create those connections. For many, the reason that they call 988 Spanish is grief, pain, our mental health experiences feel and share differently in different languages. How we grew up. I'll disclose a little bit myself that pain sounds and feels more natural to me in Spanish because that is the kind of community that I grew up in, where emotions are more efficiently and more raw in Spanish. And so in answering those calls from the community, I might be struck a bit more personally when I hear specific words, when I hear a tone in Spanish than maybe in English, and it might be circumstantial too. We've recently also received specific training to support Spanish-speaking veterans so that we may also serve the overlap, as Courtney mentioned, intersectionality, different circumstances, different life experiences. It's not going to be exactly the same. You're going to be, your experience will bring with it, your experience will be colored by how you receive information. Something, really important about language in Spanish that I think sometimes we forget is the way that respect translates in Spanish. For those of you that may not be aware, there is a difference between second person and third person nouns in Spanish. In everyday language, talking to friends or a neighbor, it feels very casual, but suddenly on the hotline, we're talking in third person. There is a immediate level of respect as a provider. So it may be as well that folks in peer support roles, even as a peer, in language, we may default to honorary titles to third person, where there are implicit boundaries in our language. And it may actually be a part of our role to chip at those boundaries to get to that emotional connection. And on the flip side, also ensuring that our community workers, that our counselors, that folks that are providing that support are supported in maintaining personal boundaries as some of these contacts may feel and be much more personal because not only are we speaking the same literal language, we might be speaking the same language of pain, and that might hit a little bit harder. Under clinical considerations, words translate differently. And one word that I'm thinking about in Spanish is ansias, nervousness, or anxiousness. But translating anxiousness and nervousness, one might be clinical, the other might just be a minimal feeling. So in providing clinical care in different languages, we must be attuned to, is this a word that I should dive a little deeper into? Is this word actually saying what my help seeker intends to share? And am I interpreting this differently based on my own lived life experience? So clinically, we may be called on asking more clarifying questions, ensuring that there is enough comfort to share their truth and separating, again, the personal ourselves, that is for ourselves, and the personal that we bring into the professional. Next slide.
In remote crisis work, boundaries do not happen automatically. They must be created with intention. Next slide, please. So we started as a crisis center that was in person, and we transitioned to being a remote center after the pandemic. So as a result, we had to learn to transition things. And I have a sense that that may be similar to some of those of you in this room. So we wanted to talk a little bit about those boundaries in transition and talking about how moving a physical space to a remote space actually transitions an organization's boundaries. So thinking about this always on work environment. So without a physical office, some staff may struggle to log off. I don't know if anyone in this room may feel that way, but having those emails, having Teams or Slack messages, and even maybe for management, having meetings extend into the evenings or very early mornings because we're working maybe across different time zones, that we're having to just always be on. So now boundaries have changed. Rather than once you were in a physical setting, you just drove home, your day ended. So that physical work to home and now home to work boundaries are now something that crisis centers have to handle, have to work through. even thinking about just the place that maybe if you work now remotely or even partially remotely in a hybrid environment, potentially in the beginning, your dining room was your office, and you had to, once dinner came on, you put your laptop to the side and started working, or even just creating this mental disconnect from having to be able to remove yourself from work and to go back into your actual personal life and become that person that you are at home to the person you are at work. But now that there is no physical distance, these boundaries now become blurred. Thinking about also a new social norm that in a remote work environment, people now saw your coworkers now begin to see your family, begin to see pets, and they get to see them in your background. Maybe your dog just shows up into a Teams meeting when no one ever knew your dog unless you physically made the decision to show a picture of your dog. Now your cat just runs across the screen. That is now something that was very different, that in remote work environments, this has become very different, that now organizations have to think about. We're creating actual backgrounds for their employees to have so that they can make an actual barrier and boundary for their staff. So this new social norm of actually knowing what your coworkers background is, what maybe that little glimpse of their home is, became a new social norm where unless you made the decision to show someone an image of your family, potentially they just came into your room. And this idea that if you were taking care of an older adult or taking care of children, that now that just became much simpler to come in, where they may just come into the room or you could just simply open the door and now they're there. Additionally, there are also new, better boundaries because now individuals maybe have better ability to take care of themselves. Again, we are a Los Angeles-based center, so that means to go 5 miles, it's a 45-minute commute. So now our staff could have that, instead of those 45 minutes in LA traffic, could spend the time actually cooking for themselves, spending time with their families. So they could actually reallocate that time to supporting themselves and building a better work-life balance as well. It also created geographical freedom where, as I mentioned, I am currently located in Pennsylvania while working for a Los Angeles-based center, which means talent can come from all over the United States for centers where they can be able to have this idea where your passion can be in crisis work and you can work in other states as permitted, which allows centers to be able to pull talent from across the United States and allows people who are very passionate about the crisis work to still work for centers that they are also equally passionate about. Next slide, please. Equally, we want to highlight some things that can show this idea of recognizing some of the early warning signs of when maybe these boundaries do become blurred. As mentioned, there are some of those family interruptions of work kind of invading the home space and other factors. So what are some items that can be on that checklist to be looking for, that staff can be looking for in themselves, volunteers, and also management? So fatigue, so that feeling of I just don't want to do this right now. Compassion fatigue, feeling that they don't have that ability to care for that individual anymore. Emotional spillover, so feeling that they just are over-identifying, that they are feeling that this emotion is also showing up in this part of their life. Burnout, of course, feeling that the organization is not serving them in the way that they felt that they could. Rise in interpersonal issues. So noticing that there is just an overall sense of different things showing up and people just not quite getting along in the way that they intended to. Defensiveness. So individuals showing up and saying, I don't want to do that, or that's not what I said. That is not it. Can also be an indicator. Pre-shift stress. So individuals also saying, I'm feeling way more stressed before I show up to shift. I don't want to come into shift, or I'm scared to come into shift, can also be a sign of this as well. We also see in the workforce side of things increased call outs, individuals reporting disrupted sleep, and also that detachment after shift. If they're unable to say, I'm unable to go for a walk or spend time with my family, or they're constantly thinking about work when not at work, is also a big sign of that ability or the inability to set that boundary. Next slide, please.
Okay. You may have seen or noticed how some of those can be hiding in plain sight, meaning how do you interpret whether something is fatigue, whether one of these ways that someone is being impacted could be or be contributing or just an indicator for us to check in. Uh, I want us to think about isolation and its siblings, where isolation and boundaries could also look a little similar. Uh, I want us to also recognize that there are many different personalities that just exist. I myself approach my work genuinely. I want to be here genuinely. My colleagues, community partners, when they meet me, a version of me. And were I to start distancing myself, to start isolating myself, to mute my personality, it would be noticeable. Now, that could be a boundary. Maybe starting this work, I showed up a little bit too much or in ways that now I want to put back into my pocket. That is absolutely okay, but you may not know unless you approach that with curiosity and respect. So, some of the signs of isolation in a negative way or in a way that might be negatively impacting someone's performance or quality of life could look like independence and self-reliance. It is really important in this work that we do remain personally connected. Maybe not how many dogs do you have, or calling attention to a pet that's no longer showing up on screen, right? One way that we might want to approach is saying something like, hey, I noticed that your dog hasn't shown on screen. That could open up the possibility of actually there's grief behind that and there's a reason that the dog is no longer here. Could also be, I got a talking to from HR and my dog is not allowed to jump on the desk anymore. So just remembering how to address different changes and leading them with curiosity, but also noticing that we don't have to be aware of every change that happens in our colleagues' lives. But if you notice someone that typically or was learning to collaborate, to ask questions, that approached you with curiosity now seems hesitant or seems to want to do their work independently without that additional support, something might have changed and it might not be for the best. We may see fear in our interactions with our staff and our colleagues. There may be burden, a fear of judgment. They might be really worried that a meeting with you would mean, ooh, you know what, we're going to talk about your performance, or this wasn't done correctly. This extra impact of or weight in our performance in our role could mean that there's something a bit more tender. And because we're in a work environment, that's where it's coming up. Maybe there was an interaction that they weren't feeling super confident about, but it's undiscussed. And so now that's snowballing into different areas of their performance. This might be someone who is more quickly misunderstanding different guidance or support that you're attempting to provide. I can think about instances where I've noted someone's performance and said, oh, I'd love to help support you in that. The response could be, oh no, I need help. I messed up. The APD needs to help me. Or it could also be, wow, our APDs are so involved. I'd be glad to get some tutoring from them. Perspective and our connection within our staff and our workforce and our volunteers and our colleagues is really important. How do we nurture trust in an environment where we do need to provide feedback, where we do actually care, and we have to balance both. Uh, Isolation, yes, I need to clock out at this time, and is there something that might be emotionally unresolved? Many of us, and I hope all of us, have ways of supporting each other and our frontline staff, whether it's through a supervisor through shifts, maybe it is an on-call that is available to discuss and debrief. Knowing that you can sign out, and prior to signing out, you can get emotional support, you can get questions that would have otherwise remained unresolved or distract you, can be extremely important. So we approach these possible warning signs or opportunities to intervene and explore more by recognizing different personalities and work styles. It's not necessarily helpful or beneficial to expect that every time that someone sets a boundary, there's something wrong, right? And it may also be helpful to just be aware and see if there are pieces that we can fit together and create that open dialogue to have someone comfortable saying, oh, no, that was just a boundary. That's not something I want to talk about from here on out. That should be okay as well. Discussing self-care and professional supports, again, incredibly important. I mentioned HR and collaborating with HR earlier, and I did see someone note in the chat the different EAP support services that have been available, and just being familiar. We ourselves might also be hesitant to reach out to HR. Maybe we've had prior experiences, or maybe we're just not familiar. Having those reintroductions can help us expand our availability to provide supports for ourselves and for our colleagues and our reports as well. Incredibly important is role clarity and communication. A 24-hour work environment, a crisis environment, things change. You are called upon to be flexible, and your flexibility may be one of your strongest resources, talents, and skills. And note those times where your role clarity maybe shifts a bit too much and you haven't checked in a while. We may be duplicating work. We may be able to find support from someone else. So if you're talking to someone in your environment and maybe you're in a debrief and they're talking about a challenging interaction and their experience shifts into, I just wish I could have. And maybe the response is hung up the phone and shown up in person. Maybe I wish I could have provided them this resource that was personally helpful for me, but is not in our resource database or is not otherwise cleared, or maybe they're no longer available. How do we bring in that loving, compassionate boundary of, I understand that that is something you wish we could do, and bring value into the work that was done, the supports that were provided, and the importance of one meaningful connection, encouraging and empowering our help seekers and community members to seek further support. For many individuals that reach out for mental health, it may be their first time, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. Showing up personally, showing up genuinely, and showing up respectfully can make a lifelong impact in someone's availability and ability to become vulnerable again and find and connect to other resources or ourselves again. Improved communication, let's create a feedback loop. Let's provide timely feedback and allow the possibility for folks to check in with us. Hey, you mentioned that you were going to get back to me on XYZ. I want our staff, our frontline staff, our volunteers to feel comfortable reaching out to an APD saying, hey, I think I was supposed to hear back from you. There's a level of respect to that as well. I want to hear from you. This is information that is important and helpful for my role. And so naming what is happening, naming it, and addressing it as well. Is there burnout? Let's talk about what that looks like. What has helped you in the past, and what supports do we have available here that can help support you as well? Next slide. So nurturing professionalism is essential to workplace and personal wellness, not just us as a person, us as a professional person. Next slide. It may have taken us a lot of effort to break through into a nonprofit, into a government funded, into a community health clinic. Many of us we grew differently, or this was unexpected, and we are so proud of the work that we do. We want to also be seen professionally for our skill sets, for our vulnerability, for how far we've gotten. And so internal connection can lead to safety in vulnerability, knowing that by opening up, you will have a management team, you will have a supervisory team, and you will have colleagues that can help support you close back up. Growth through difficult conversations, again, this is that vulnerability. If you had an interaction that you could improve on, it may be hurtful or painful or just very vulnerable to hear. And we can also be really excited to know that we ourselves are growing and improving creatures. I want to know what I can do the next time and how I can improve, but there is trust required. And that trust isn't only going to happen when we know each other personally. It's going to happen when folks trust our professional experience, when they trust our clinical judgment, and when we believe that they have the skill sets as well to achieve our expectations. Providing intentional and professional growth opportunities, reaching out to folks when there's an opportunity available, or asking what are their interests. There may be other trainings available that can supplement them. There are plenty available here through 988 Lifeline, through our community partners and your community connections that you've made as well. Even if there might not be a role open in your position, we can always help support with the skill sets to get there. Also, realistic skill sets awareness. Not everybody is amazing at active listening or silence or open-ended questions. That is okay, and that is a part of growth. That is why we have so many tools in our tool belts. Providing accurate, genuine support and feedback is important. When I started, silence was my worst active listening skill, and I never would have gotten to where I am if someone hadn't allowed themselves to be uncomfortable enough to tell me, you really got to work on this. It's really, truly helped support my entire professional growth to be open to sitting in discomfort and knowing that I can be better and having the support to do that. So curious, how has intentional support contributed to your own professional growth? Maybe someone mentioned something you could work on. Maybe someone reinforced and encouraged you to explore something that was at first just an idea. As we transition over, I'd love to see what you write. And next slide.
My work day may look different than your work day. Please do not feel obligated to respond outside of your normal working hours. So this is an email signature of our work, our wellness coordinator. And I think that this email signature has made its rounds everywhere in our organization, and for the right reasons. So next slide, please. So just to name a few protective factors of how an organization can respond to ensure that we are showing up as an organization to protect the workforce from and ensuring that boundaries are protected. So consistent supervision and debriefs that are planned, scheduled, and can be counted on. Peer support and community within the organization that are also planned and supported. Training in self-compassion, boundaries, and emotional regulation that are offered by the organization or have the ability for the staff and workforce to engage in. Flexible scheduling that support the individual, but also support the operations of the organization. So both have to be true. Support from leadership and organization. So similar to that wellness email signature, that it is an organizational understanding that wellness is important. And then intentional boundary management tactics. Next slide. So the moment everyone's been waiting for. So how do we do this at D.D. Hirsch? So what are some examples of how do we build in those protective factors, and how do we build in everything that we have been talking about with real examples at our organization. So first and foremost is shift design and scheduling. So we intentionally, with our phenomenal operations team, we have ensured that our counselor and supervisor schedules have guaranteed protected meal breaks and their protected rest breaks. So they're built into their schedule. When they show up on shift, they know exactly when their rest break is, they know exactly when their meal break is, and that is their protected time. They ensure that their schedules do not have a mix of an overnight schedule and a daytime schedule, meaning their day does not go from being on daytime one day, overnight next day. It is consistent, it is supportive. Additionally, we have something known as shift bids, where there are voluntary shift bids within that shift bid structure, where staff can bid on schedules that are supportive in nature to the organization, meaning that they are to the call pattern of which callers or help seekers are reaching out. And they also align with potentially a schedule that a counselor or supervisor may find more appealing. So they can bid on that schedule and can maybe move into that schedule and know that this is something that is more flexible to them and something that is more supportive for them. And this is an option for them as, again, as an option and an opportunity. Additionally, we also build training into their schedules. So an individual is not expected to work 40 hours and then have a mandatory training and do 2 hours outside of their 40 hours. Additionally, we have a end of shift protocol where, for example, on our chat text team, they have something known as a cutoff where they have built in time where they know if it's going to be an 8-hour shift, that there is about a buffer time where they know that at this buffer time, they're not expected to take more interactions after that buffer time so that they can get as close as possible to their clock off time. Of course, we work in crisis work. There's never going to be exactly going to cut off exactly at that time, but to best support as much as possible. Additionally, because we're a remote crisis center, we also try to encourage physical environment change as much as possible. Our managers are always checking in during their supervision, asking, have you been able to change your environment? Have you been able to move or change or gone outside? And we also encourage a remote commute. This is actually Ali's idea at some point early on in our transition to remote work, where they mentioned, have you built in a remote commute? Have you maybe walked around the block before you've interacted with your family or whoever you live with? Have you listened to a podcast? Have you done something before you're interacting with those you live with? We also do not require video on debriefs as a result, because again, we explained how intimate maybe turning on your camera can be if you don't have a background. So we don't require that because that is also trying to see who and what is in that. Next slide. Supervision and debriefing, it is a standard practice. So we have a debriefing code built into our system where staff do select, I am debriefing with my supervisor. Supervisors are trained to pre-brief and debrief into their interactions to ensure that our staff are getting that support prior to the start of their shift and after on all of our modalities. And we also have a 24/7 on-call managers, which both Ale and I are, so that we can also provide that debrief to both our supervisors and our counselors. There's mandatory staff supervisions that are required that our staff participate in with our managers as well. It's scheduled, they know when it's going to happen. But of course, there's flexibility. If they need support sooner than that, they're welcome to reach out to their manager to get that support. Additionally, our wellness coordinator, as I will continue to probably speak of her praises, there's something known as Listen, Support, Connect, where we offer that opportunity for our frontline staff to connect with the wellness coordinator to say, hey, we're noticing just something recently, we're noticing that interactions are carrying more emotional weight. How can the organization support us in that? The wellness coordinator then has built-in feedback loops to bring that to management and find out ways that we can respond and support them. Additionally, as mentioned, training education is super important. So our wellness coordinator, once again, will also bring in trainings and speakers from our community partners and throughout to train our team on optional opportunities that they have to gain their skills to learn more about compassion fatigue, boundaries, secondary traumatic stress, and learn about those opportunities for them, for themselves. So not only focus on the help seeker, but also about themselves. We also normalize the use of EAP. It's probably something that our managers talk about very often so that they ensure it's not something that is this ominous presence. We also have other examples listed there. Next slide, please. Finally, again, this is really built in this organizational atmosphere and expectations all the way from the top, the very top from our senior leadership, where they really talk about and establish a right to disconnect policy. There's no expectation where we should be responding outside of our work hours. Of course, our directors never expect us to respond. I mean, my director, my boss, and Alejandra's boss will message us and say, when you're back on, here's something. So even that quick just statement ahead of time gives that pressure of, oh, okay, I don't need to respond right away. It gives that boundary respecting behavior at that leadership level, that even knowing the director does not expect you to respond right away. So knowing that that is the atmosphere that is set at the senior leadership level, then trickles down. So then ensuring that even our frontline staff know that once they're clocked off, they're clocked off. They're not going to get an expectation to hear from us or they have to do anything from us. So that is why we also do not have any organizational apps on personal phones. They do not have to have Teams on their personal phone. They are not required to respond to anything organizational outside of the work hours. And that lovely email signature. So again, we as an organizational frame boundary keeping as a professional practice, not as selfishness. Next slide, please. And that is the end of our presentation. We would like to thank you all for your time, your attention, your eagerness for joining us. We are glad to have been able to share all of this with you. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to both of us, and we appreciate your time. With that, we'll pass it over to the team here.